Hello, my name's Darren and welcome to the Maker's Rage podcast. So today I'm going to continue the Muses series, which I began some time back with an introductory episode to the series. Then I followed that up with a very long one on the epic muse Calliope, followed by Urania, the muse of astronomy, the most scientific of the muses. It just so happens these two are considered the two most senior of the sorority. Although I said in the introductory episode I believed that I would be doing them in no particular order, but as the fancy took me, this time round I fancied doing an episode on the muse of dance, Terpsichore. Her name from the Greek simply means terpos, delight, and choros, the dance. So Terpsichore is she who delights in dancing. For those of you who like long, obscure words, remember the adjective terpsichorean, which means relating to dance. We get the words chorus and choreography from the dancing part of her name. The word choreography simply means dance writing or dance notation, because before recorded technology, before Instagram, TikTok and all that, for those who couldn't afford dance lessons, it was often learned from books, like The Dancing Master, first published in 1651 by John Playford, and it went through 77 editions. I still think it was mainly used as a guide. People back then and since time immemorial have learned dance the same way they learn it now, by seeing it done, imitating it and practicing until the dancer reaches as near perfection as their talent allows. The ancient Greek chorus, incidentally, was actually a homogeneous group of performers who commented with a collective voice on the actions of a scene in Greek tragedy or comedy. They variously danced, sang, spoke their lines in unison, and wore masks which reflected their emotions as they performed, with features distorted and exaggerated enough that people in the distant Koilon seats up the hillside amphitheatre could see them. Today we associate the chorus less with the dancing and more with the singing, although the term chorus line still refers to a dancing group. Just like the other muses, Terpsichore is associated with numerous lovers. According to Apollonius of Rhodes, she's the mother of the sirens by the river god Strymon, the sirens whose alluring song led sailors to their doom. She also had a fling with the war god Ares, and another with the river god Rhesus, giving birth to a couple of Thracian kings. The father of history, by the way, Herodotus, who has also been called the father of lies, named the 9 books of his great chronicle on the Persian Wars the Histories, after each of the 9 muses. You feel it's merely a framing device, though, that the muses' association with the narrative in each book is loose at best. Terpsichore's book is number 5, on the Ionian Revolt. The muse of dance supposedly mirrors the shifting dynamics and fluid movement of the Ionian Rebellion and the counteractions. To give another example, Book 8 is associated with the muse of astronomy Urania. It recounts the naval battles of the Persian Wars, the stars being so important to naval navigators. Like her 8 sisters, Terpsichore has her emblems, which don't include a pair of dancing shoes as you might have guessed, but a lyre and a plectrum, indicating that, like all the muses, her art has its function in music. So what is dance? Certainly another one of those things easy to recognise but difficult to define. It's supposed to be an art form, although like most art forms, it can be abused depending on the context. It can be done to the music of Swan Lake, or to what can barely be recognised as music, at 2 a.m. in a nightclub, where sweat peels the paint off the walls. A sequence of bodily movements with aesthetic and often symbolic value, says Wikipedia. Symbolic indeed, just as with astronomy, where the heavenly spheres were supposed to emit a kind of music, and the stars and planets, like an ancient Greek chorus, were once taught to dance in accompaniment. One must still have chaos in oneself to give birth to a dancing star, said Nietzsche. But Nietzsche's star, one feels, wouldn't have its light obscured by an accompanying chorus. It is a solitary performer. Anyway, as with singing, we're not the only species on the planet that dances, or appears to. Just watch how the birds of paradise move, or the red-capped mannequin moonwalks, the waggle dance of honeybees, and the courtship dances of peacock spiders as well. And we know parrots and cockatoos can move rhythmically, intentionally to music. Dolphins exhibit rhythmic movements that could be considered dance, and even male mud skippers twirl their tails and arch their bodies during courtship. We can argue the motive isn't always the same, but we recognize the manifestation. And how far back have humans danced? Since before we stood up on two legs, no doubt. Since before we spoke. Although our cousins, the apes, aren't exactly noted for their rhythm. Chimpanzees in the wild have been observed performing rain dances, swaying and strutting when hearing rain. Chimps in captivity as well have also been seen swaying, tapping and clapping in response to music, perhaps suggesting a predisposition to rhythm. Or are they just imitating us? I said dancing begins in imitation, but one feels for the chimp, mastering the dance isn't the end it has in mind, perhaps a slice of apple or a peanut. Still, with their comparatively big brains, none of the apes can compare with the birds of paradise. And why do birds dance? The same reason they sing. Sex, of course. And although we humans have ritualized it, sublimated it into an art form, most people in history, let's keep it real, have associated dancing with copulation. Erato presides over love poetry and song. But when the male bird sings, can we call it love? Is the bird of paradise in love or lust, or mere infatuation when it dances? Does it distinguish his Juliet as a snowy dove trooping with crows? Of course not, because it will perform the same dance to the next female bird that passes by, as fickle and inconstant as the moon, in other words, which Romeo swears by. Lovebirds, on the other hand, are named such because of the strong lifelong pair bonds they form with their chosen mates. Yet they cannot sing. Like most humans, in fact, yet they putter, squeak and chatter when interacting together, as if in their own world, like a young couple in love, like John Keats and Fanny Brawne. I'm not sure if John Keats could carry a tune, but he could certainly write an ode, and in his Ode to a Nightingale, described its song as a high requiem, perhaps interpreting what he heard as a foreshadowing of his early death at 25. But of course the nightingale isn't singing a high requiem, it's just doing what its genome has programmed it to do in order to secure a mate. Anyway, I suggested earlier that humans are the only extant apes with a real proclivity for dancing, and it seems we've been dancing at least as long as we've been able to depict it in art. TikTok hasn't been around that long, and until recorded technology, dancing has perhaps been the most elusive of the arts. Fragments of ancient songs, although rare, do exist even from the Bronze Age, and from ancient Greece and Rome. We've also music from the Middle Ages, and notation allows us to hear the music of Mozart and Beethoven, although there are no recordings, and no one alive has ever heard them perform. By contrast, all we know of how people dance before moving pictures are stills, attitudes frozen in time, from the 9,000-year-old cave paintings of Bhimbetka in India, to the dancers depicted on Greek vases, to the best-selling Dancing Master textbook I mentioned earlier, which was used as recently as the 19th century. Alan Lomax, whom I mentioned in my episode on Pacts with the Devil, was a huge fan of blues music, and I can't fault him for that. I do have my issues, though, with his choreometric, cross-cultural analysis of dance and movement style. For example, he correlates carving motions in dance with cultures who have developed metallurgy. He even invokes some questionable stats, asserting that in 80% of cultures where metal tools are used, or where metal has become traditional, this is reflected in the curvilinear nature of their dance, because their dancing supposedly reflects the use of their tools. For example, the sweeping motion of the side, or the way a swordsman wields their weapon. More primitive or less developed cultures tend to restrict their dancing in one dimension, up and down, left and right, Metallurgy is associated with greater productivity and centralization of government. More productive societies have more time, more leisure to develop their dances. The more developed they become, the more skill and practice is required to master them. And thus we have the creation of a specialist class, like the scribes, who communicate not in writing but in movement, the spirit and ethos of their culture. And in ritual we have its primary expression across cultures. Of course, most of us today dance simply to enjoy ourselves, and this has led some societies to prohibit dancing, to prevent the sexes mingling too freely. But Terpsichore, remember, is she who delights in dancing, not just something done perfunctorily, as a duty or stylized ritual. Most of us are jittering erratically, arms flailing, feet shuffling, moving however the music takes us, to the befuddlement of those around us, no doubt. And so improvisation democratizes dance in a way that isn't feasible with the other arts. How many of us can pick up an instrument we've never played and just start improvising? It may have been difficult to capture in painting, in notation, in a textbook, but dancing is nevertheless the most accessible of the arts, since we're already possessed of the only instrument needed to execute it, our bodies. Poets and painters have long tried to capture the motion of dance in their media. William Carlos Williams, describing Bruegel's peasants, writes in The Dance, "They were dancing and the music was in them, in their feet, and they went on spinning and spinning, a whirl of bodies in the village square." But this hardly does the painting justice, and the painting, I'm sure, falls far short of the scene Bruegel tried to capture. It's been just over a century that we've been able to record movement at last. Before then, the only way to capture dancing was to make it stop happening, to freeze it in time, like the dead flowers preserved in a herbarium. "O bodies sway to music," said William Butler Yeats in Among School Children. "O brightening glance, how can we know the dancer from the dance?"